right. So it's been a couple of weeks, and our last session today is in the series of selected significant conversations in Jewish history. Many more, obviously, but I was inspired by an institution known as Sefaria. If you're not familiar with it, you'll see it spelt on the flyer. And they do wonderful work in collecting texts in Hebrew and English and different commentaries, and sometimes have questions, and meant to be used in schools and study groups. And reading some of their work inspired me to glean from some of the conversations they focus upon, both ancient, medieval, and contemporary commentaries. Very worthwhile. And it's written in a way that's very user-friendly. Sefaria. So I guess I have to say one of the highlights of the last 2 weeks actually was yesterday. You might remember that I told you last year that I was volunteering in being matched with a student at Hadassah College. These are post-high school, and they want their students beyond the formal English classes that they take to spend time with an English speaker. And interestingly, you'll remember perhaps Shimon and Josie Arbel, the brother and sister-in-law of your future president, I believe. Yes, Barbara Albert. Shimon Arbel used to be Shimon Albert. And they coordinate this. So I began again yesterday with a new student, and her name is Tasneem, an Israeli Arab, and she is in her first year at Hadassah College, looking to become an optometrist, and she's studying sciences. So she asked if we could begin, it was our first meeting, in Hebrew. And I said, okay, even though we're meant to plow through in English. And we began in English, but every now and then she would ask how to say something in English as she was speaking. And so she's telling me that hopefully in 4 years, she'll be an optometrist. So how did she say hopefully in Hebrew? Anybody want to take a guess?
Tikvah. Often Tikvah.
No.
Be'ezrat Hashem.
Be'ezrat Hashem. Exactly. Very good, Merle.
Good for her. Good
Yep.
for her.
And then as we're introducing ourselves, she sounds like a study alcoholic. But on the weekends, Friday, she studies as well. But on Shabbat, Saturday, she said she works. I asked her where, and she said at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. And then I asked, what does she do there? And she said, do you know what a katvanit Shabbat is? Katvanit, the shorish is chaf taf bet, from the word kotev. So anybody want to guess what a katvanit Shabbat is? Shaarei Tzedek Hospital?
Yeah.
Shabbos goy.
Well, basically, yeah.
And
She's
you write
walking around.
documents?
Note taker.
Yeah, she's walking around with a doctor who does not want to write on Shabbat, and she's writing down for him. I've heard of this, but never actually saw it
I'm in the class. I'll call you back.
in reality.
Saw it in Bikur Cholim, Bracha.
What? I
In
saw it in
Bikur Cholim.
Cholim.
You just don't remember.
I don't remember. It's a long, long time ago. Yeah. Okay, talking about a long time ago. This week in history, we were given a number, personally and universally and nationally, a number of very rich gifts. Yesterday was November 29th. I'm sure that says something to, if not all of you, most of you. So it's the 75th anniversary of the 1947 partition plan. And we will return to that item later. And in fact, you could hear last night people celebrating in the streets of Yerushalayim, singing, dancing, and the news reported drinking. So that's one gift. Today, November 30th, is the birthday of at least 3 significant personalities. Anybody want to venture a guess?
Oh, really? Shall I say Churchill?
No, not you.
I know.
Winston Churchill. Anybody else? Mark Twain. And I mention those two because on his last birthday, our father, Avram Feder, his 87th birthday, referred to himself sharing a birthday with these 2 great men. And I wasn't at the party, but I've seen the video of it. And he explains in Hebrew to his children, to his grandchildren, all gathered around, why it's so special for him that he shared a birthday with these 2 men. Anybody want to take a guess why?
They both wrote praisingly of Israel. And
Okay,
were supportive of Israel.
yeah. Now, I suppose that doesn't sound strange, knowing the individual I'm talking about. Absolutely. And if you read their writings, you will see that. Now, you might think that I planned this or that I didn't plan this, but today is also the 6th day of Kislev, Vav Kislev. And what is the significance of that? It is the yahrzeit of one of the people that we are focusing upon today, David Ben Gurion. And the conversation that we are going to focus upon is between Ben Gurion, our first prime minister, as the modern state of Israel, and Chazon Ish. Now I want to share my screen. Already. Okay. This is from the daily newspaper Ma'ariv. And it's going back to October 20th, 1952. It's good to see years that are even before me. Anyway, it says Ben Gurion noad im Chazon Ish. Ben Gurion was meeting with Chazon Ish. Now, a brief word about both these individuals, one we're very familiar with, before we discuss the conversation they had at a very important, significant meeting. So Chazon Ish, also known as Rabbi Avram Yeshaya Karelitz, took on the name Chazon Ish, which means a man of vision, and he was responsible for a magnum opus focusing on the Shulchan Aruch, and he was a sage of Lithuanian Jewry. He lived from 1878 to 1953, which means his conversation with Ben Gurion was only a year before he left us. He was also a man of science, and that's significant for what he contributed to Israel beyond Torah learning when he made Aliyah in 1933. And he made Aliyah from what today is known as Belarus. As I say, he studied sciences, so people who were interested in halakha, Jewish law, looked to him for his scientific knowledge in trying to deal with issues that we've mentioned before: milking cows on Shabbat, Shemitah, taking care of the land. And also, he was known to not want to get into any politics. And that can't be said for every rabbinic leader in Israel. Now, Ben Gurion, born in Plansk, Poland in 1886, educated in a Hebrew school that his father founded, who was an ardent Zionist. And Ben Gurion, by the time he was a teenager, led a Zionist youth group known as Ezra. And he made Aliyah in 1906. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Sofim Scouts and probably Bnei Akiva. Ezra, I'm nostalgic about, because when we were here, when I was in grade 6 for the year, I remember going to a youth group every Shabbat afternoon, and it was located in Rehavia, and the name of the youth group was Ezra. Now, I said that this Chazon Ish wasn't interested in politics. However, when Ben Gurion asked to meet with him because he was aware of how the community, the ultra-Orthodox community, admired him, he thought he would be the best person to meet with, and he had an agenda. And interestingly, Chazon Ish agreed to meet with Ben Gurion. And I'd like to begin by sharing this on the screen. October 20th, 1952, David Ben Gurion and Chazon Ish. Rabbi Yechiel Spiro tells the following story in his wonderful book, Touched by a Story. When the state of Israel was first formed, Prime Minister David Ben Gurion appointed his cabinet. Among those selected was Zalman Oran, a non-religious Jew who was to serve as Minister of Education. Zalman's wife, also secular like her husband, nonetheless lit Shabbos candles every week, a custom passed down from her mother. Every Friday night, she would cover her eyes and pray that her children should grow up to be as great as the greatest Jew she knew, David Ben Gurion. This was her heartfelt prayer, week after week. In 1952, Ben Gurion met with the great sage and Torah scholar, Rabbi Avram Yeshaya Karelitz, known popularly as the Chazon Ish. They discussed many important issues during that momentous meeting. And Ben Gurion came away from that encounter incredibly impressed and somewhat awed by the Chazon Ish's saintliness and sensitivity. A few days after that meeting, Ben Gurion met with Zalman Aron and other members of his cabinet to discuss certain policies. And he began by describing the Chazon Ish and how amazed he was by his angelic presence. That night, Aron went home and related the entire episode to his wife. The next week, when she lit the Shabbos candles, Mrs. Aron's prayer for her children was modified. Instead of wishing that her children grow up to be like Ben Gurion, she now prayed that they become like the Chazon Ish, a man she knew nothing about other than the fact that Ben Gurion was unusually impressed with him and held him in high esteem. Now, I write here 2 questions. Do you find this interesting? Do you find anything within this tale puzzling? Anyone?
I find when you're in the presence of certain people, you don't even have to talk. There are certain vibrations that go back to and fro to just leave you feeling 100% trustworthy, trusting, and comfortable, going beyond words, just demeanor.
Yep, I agree. Elliot, anybody else?
I'm thinking that because David Ben Gurion held him in such high esteem, if he or she is hoping that they'll be like Ben Gurion, once she sees that he even holds somebody higher in esteem, she figures this would be a good model for her children.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I have to submit that I was a little put off by that. You know, why not, first of all, light the candles in honor of both of them? Ben Gurion, you know, why? I don't know, there was something about that. I mean, especially that he emphasizes that she really doesn't know him, but it does show that she really has faith in Ben Gurion, that the way he was talking. But again, I don't think she should have to choose between the two. Yeah. Okay. There are many wonderful tales in Sparrow's book. Okay, so now, this is a picture of Ben Gurion coming to Chazon Ish, his modest home in Bnei Brak. Ben Gurion at the time was 66, and the Chazon Ish was 73. And he was, as I said before, perhaps the most respected representative of religious Jewry. It was expected that this meeting would further sharpen the definition of the status quo. Now, we mentioned status quo in another context last month. The status quo was the compromise regarding the place of Jewish law in public life. We're talking about 1952, and we could be talking about 2022, in which Ben Gurion had already made significant concessions, including the non-conscription of yeshiva students and closing of businesses on Shabbat. Now, much of what we learn about this meeting comes from the one other person that stayed with Ben Gurion and Chazon Ish, and he says the following: I too went into the room and sat down in the corner and recorded the conversation. I saw a short Jew with a handsome face, bent over, a table, a chair, a rickety bed, and books, books, books. Everyone thought he would talk to him about the recruitment of girls, but there was not one word about that. They sat opposite each other across a small table. Now, I purposely didn't put the name of the one person that was witness to this conversation. It was Ben-Gurion's personal secretary. Anybody remember whom that was? He went on later to become the 5th president of Israel. Who was that?
Is that Herzog
No,
or Perez?
Yitzhak
Rabin?
Navon.
Oh, no,
Yitzhak Navon. Okay, so from his notes, because Ben-Gurion also wrote notes about the meeting, two things become very clear. Ben-Gurion admired the rabbi sitting across from him for his spirituality. He did not agree with him on many items, but he was impressed with his spirituality. I guess he felt that was a balance to his own pragmatism, which he was known for. In fact, we're told, and it was reminded today on the news, that while they were listening to the radio regarding the vote and the partition, Ben-Gurion was already writing down things that he knew he would have to take care of. Just words, if you look at the memoirs. He'd have to build a memshala, government. He'd have to give the country a name. They'd have to decide on the capital, Birat Yisrael, the hymnon, the anthem, the currency, military, the ports and the airports, budget, the police, broadcasting systems. And he was doing that as he's listening to this vote. Okay. Secondly, we can glean from his notes that he was hoping to find common ground with this ultra-Orthodox rabbi and his community, which was a minority in this country now made up of many chalutzim chiloniim, secular pioneers. And the question that was really burning within Ben-Gurion was, how could they uncover a strategy to reach a better form of coexistence between the Torah observant and those with lower levels of religious observance? And what is a Chazon Ish response from the Talmud? Follow along. It was taught when the verse states, justice, justice shall you pursue, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, one mention of justice is stated with regard to judgment, being strict. And one is stated with regard to compromise. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, you have to compromise. How so? And they give an example. Where there are two camels who were ascending the ascent of Beit Horon, where there is a narrow, steep path, and they encounter each other. Imagine the two camels, and it is very, very narrow. There's an obvious question. If both of them attempt to ascend, both of them will fall. If they ascend one after the other, both of them will succeed in ascending. How does one decide, though, which of them should go first? If there is one that is laden, has a burden on him, and one that is not laden, the needs of the one that is not laden should be overridden due to the needs of the one that is laden. Now that seems to make sense, right? You carrying this burden, you should go first. Okay. Now, this text is a parable. What is Chazon Ish trying to say? He's saying, anybody want to? He's making an analogy between the camel that is laden to Jews that are observant. Can you say anything based on that?
I think what he's saying is that the Jews who are observant have many laws and rules that they are obliged to follow, whereas the Chiloni have much more freedom of activity. Therefore, they should bend to accommodate those who observe in a certain way.
Okay, all right. Anybody want to suggest? I think Marlene is on the right track, definitely. Could you make a case for the secular, not just being, you know, I'm free and I can do whatever I want, so I should let the one who's burdened take care of themselves first?
Well,
Can
yeah,
anyone?
yeah. I mean,
Linda,
if you're in the government and you have to do all the tasks of defending and all the things that sometimes need to be done that maybe an observant person couldn't do, then it falls to them.
okay, good. It's interesting that you said the government. You could probably expand that to other areas of responsibility. But thank you, Marlene and Linda. So, according to Chazon Ish, the religious Jews are analogous to, the laden camel. And he says to Ben Gurion, we are laden with 3,500 years of history, Torah study, and mitzvot. You, the secular Zionists, who are not laden, but are a relatively new movement, you must give way. Now, I emphasized, I'll repeat it. You, the secular Zionists, who are not laden, but are a relatively new movement, you must give way. What would you respond? Why does that word new bother me, if you couldn't tell? You're not seeing this.
Okay, it's not new because it's all based on years and years and years of wanting to go to Jerusalem and going back.
Thank you, Mel. Yep. Yeah. You know, he's talking to them as if he's acknowledging that they're new in the sense that they're pioneers that moved from Europe. But this movement to come to Israel is exactly as Mel just said. Now, how does Ben Gurion respond? And you don't have this in front of you either.
Bracha,
Go on, Marlene. Go on.
I would think that this presented Ben Gurion with another pragmatic problem, because he understood what the Chazon Ish was saying to him, and yet with all of the pragmatic issues, like making sure that the country would endure, this was a burden that was going to be given to others other than that community, and it was going to be a problem for him as to how he was going to make this work.
Yeah. And it's still a problem. That's part of what we're seeing today. I want to say tonight, as it's evening here. As I said before, we're still talking about these same issues, and we'll get back to that. So in fact, listen carefully to Ben Gurion's response. And tell me, on this camel, like the secular camel, is there no burden of a mitzvah? And the mitzvah of settling the land, is that not a mitzvah? And is it not a burden? And the mitzvah of protecting life, is that not a mitzvah? And what are the young men doing that you are so opposed to? They are sitting on the borders and guarding you. Isn't that a mitzvah? What do you think Chazon Ish responded to that? And they both had mutual respect for each other, despite this rather serious difference of opinion, perspective. What do you think Chazon Ish responded? Something very, very specific. When he's being asked, don't you think the soldiers are fulfilling a mitzvah? It's not Shabbat, it's not Kashrut, it's not Shavuot, but isn't it not a mitzvah? The Chazon Ish said, see if you can finish my sentence. The soldiers are sustained because
Of our
Our
mitzvahs.
prayers.
both, but what he exactly said is because we learn Torah. Now, that is still the claim today. And we've said this here. There is a need for Torah learners. We can't forget the basis of our raison d'etre, but there is also a need for the physical protection. And the question comes down to, and I guess that's still being figured out, can you really just do one and not the other? I guess what I'm saying there is that alavai, that the soldier, Chiloni soldier, would also be learning. But certainly, now, to be fair, there's a lot of conversations, if we're talking about conversations going on before and these days as well. Is the Giyus, the draft rules, going to change? And of course, there are many who don't want it. They still want what Ben Gurion set down, but it should be known to you, and we've mentioned this, that there are many Haredim that are joining the army. I could go off on a tangent now, but I won't. Just it's so difficult when you're hearing different stories. Have to be very, very careful. Definitely, I think the rules should change. Absolutely. And there are those soldiers, you've heard of the program Hesder Yeshiva, where soldiers stay in the army longer because they divide their time between learning and going out on the battlefield. Okay. On several occasions, after meeting, Ben-Gurion expressed his enchantment with the Chazon Ish. Upon leaving the room after the meeting, he told Rabbi Gershon Grishenkorn, then mayor of Bnei Brak, he, the Chazon Ish, is a smart Jew, a ladder to the ground, and his head comes to heaven. A biblical reference to the story of Jacob. He characterized the Rav as in good spirits and with much laughter, lacking a zealot's anger. That's perhaps a very important term, phrase, in the past and these days. A few days after the historic meeting, he began a cabinet conference, Ben-Gurion, by discussing how impressed he was by the Chazon Ish's gentleness and kindliness, and how awed he was by the great sage's radiance and angelic holiness, that's spirituality. Moreover, he expressed an incredible reverence for the Rav, even when taking a position adverse to him. For example, when the Chazon Ish, in a December 7th, 1952 letter, took issue with Ben-Gurion's decree on national service for women, a 2-year mandatory civic service law for women had been passed at the time. The law was ultimately never implemented. Ben-Gurion responded as follows. In honor of the genius Chazon Ish, Zichron Meir Bnei Brak, I was pleased to receive your letter, and I am very sorry that I cannot do your will. Regarding the women recruiting, there is a double conscience problem. There is a Haredi community whose conscience is hurt by the recruitment, and there is a large part of Israel whose conscience affected by the lack of recruitment. I know that among the halachic scholars, the opinions differ. I am not prepared to put my head between those, and certainly I will not dare to stand up against you because I know that you are Gadol Hador, a great in this generation. However, I know the security needs of the people of Israel, and pikuach nefesh, saving a life of the nation, trumps everything. And I am sorry that you characterize recruiting women for national service as a decree. Allow me to add that the meeting and talking with you was an important experience for me, and I will never forget it. With high regard and respect, David Ben-Gurion. The respect went both ways. The Chazon Ish characterized Ben-Gurion as a man with a neshama gdola, an expansive soul. Saul J. Singer, you might have read many years ago, he lost his son, who was a lone soldier, Alex Singer, and he was one of the first to publish his letters as he served in the army. Now, I find it fascinating that these two personalities speak so highly of each other, though they differ on crucial, at least one very, very crucial item. And perhaps that's meant to be some type of model for us as we persist in these same challenges. How were the needs of the newly formed secular government of Israel to be reconciled with the needs of the traditionally observant community. Some say that this question today is being turned around, but it's really the same. As Ben-Gurion suggested, we need to find a way to coexist. There's the question of existence, of preserving human life. Ben-Gurion recounted saying to the Chazon Ish, shouldn't love of the people of Israel take precedence over everything? The Chazon Ish responded that although the love of Israel and love of Torah may seem like two separate things, they're not, because there is no Torah without Israel and no Israel without Torah. So if you listen to what Chazon Ish is saying here, he's not totally assimilating what he's saying. Because he is saying that if you don't have Israel, then you're not going to have the Torah. Now, the other is true as well. You don't want to land, this specific land, without Torah, because that's the original purpose of this wonderful country with lousy drivers. So,
Bracha.
yes, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if you want us to comment, but
Go ahead. I'll tell you after you begin.
well, I don't know if I sent you, and I don't know if anyone else saw, there was an article in the New York Times by Naftali Bennett this week.
That.
And he said that the reason they succeeded, he said he had this terrible view of Abbas. And when he spoke with him, he found that he was a religious man and he is a religious man. And they said, we respect each other on those grounds and we put that aside. But what he did in the government of people that he disagreed with philosophically and politically and everything, they did agree to work on the 70%. The infrastructure, the transportation, the things that they could work on. And the other things, so they worked as partners and it worked very well. So I don't know, I just thought that seemed relevant.
Well, I think you were trying to answer my question, how people can, even if they differ on certain things, how you can still coexist, but all the parties involved have to be intent on just that, coexisting. We won't go off there, but I understand why you just said what you said. So together with this ever prevalent question of how we're going to coexist. And we're focusing not on our external foe, but the divisiveness within the country. Together with this ever-present question, there are others essential to Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. Amongst the many questions that are still alive and not so well, one of the questions, challenges, was the focus of a book launch I attended Sunday evening at the Menachem Begin Center. The book, Theodor Herzl, Zionist Writings, 3 massive volumes, edited by Professor Gil Troy and published by Koren. Usually we see Koren publications and it's a machzor or a sidur. Well, Matthew Miller the head of Gurion, initiated recently what he's calling the project, the Library of the Jewish People, wanting to create a library that will be written in ways that new generations will be open to reading. So what that means is, and this, he sees this as taking several decades. So for instance, this book of Herzl's writings, sure, you can read it in different languages, but apparently when it's translated, it has not been what we call reader friendly. And you really don't grasp the thoughts of Herzl beyond him saying we need a state of our own. Now, why is there such a need for, at this point, a new translation? What would be the reason, aside from what I just said, that on a very practical level, it's hard, especially if you're not reading in the language that Herzl wrote, but if you have to read a translation, why is it so desperately important? Gurion and Gil Troy, what was the reasoning behind translating Herzl's writings again in a better fashion? What would be the philosophy behind that? And there will be other thinkers
You know,
and activists.
it's a new generation, and we
Go
have
ahead.
and we have to be able to, I guess, write to their understanding. And I think, because Gil Troy has, written with others, and again, he's an observant Jew, and I think that sort of helps to, but he's served in the secular community. So I think he's an excellent bridge between between these things.
Right on, Bev. Interesting. After Gil spoke for about 40 minutes, then Melanie Phillips, are you familiar with that name? The British journalist.
Yes.
She spoke and she actually described herself as, like Herzl, having an aha moment several years ago in realizing the importance of Israel and giving up on Britain and their lack of love for our people, and together with America. But together with Melanie Phillips was also Yaakov Katz, who was the editor of the Jerusalem Post. And interestingly, Gil Troy writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post, and it's called Center Field. And Katz pointed out, he said, it's interesting that that's the name of your column, because I see very clearly that there is a week that you are to the right, and there is a week that you are to the left. And I felt good that he said that, because I've noticed that in my reading. And I think that sums up the situation here, is that when we've said, Shezelo Pashut, that it isn't simple, that it's very complicated, that there are things from the right, things from the left. So yes, but what all three said was that, as Bev just said, it's a new generation, a younger generation, but even the older generation maybe are in a dangerous place. And what did they mean? Firstly, we have to spend more time on Israel's principles, Herzl's principles, and other figures, and the original Chazon, vision despite the fact that Herzl was not particularly observant. Rather than drowning in all the politics, we've got to get away from that, all three said. The younger generation must be inspired by the likes of a Ben Gurion, and perhaps their parents have to be reminded as well. Secondly, and I'm going to give you an example here, taking us back to yesterday, the decision for the partition. For those who were not or are not actually part of the experience of Israel's tkuma, from the word kum, to get up, revival, for whom the past and the beginning, the rebuilding of this country is a distant phenomenon, that's a very dangerous place, especially when we've been discussing the difficulties and the divides between Israel and the Golan. So I want to finish with reading from a witness to the announcement of the partition. And I want you to follow along and note as I read how you feel. Do you really sense the excitement that this woman, Tzipi, is describing? And how do you think younger generation would feel about it? Like, what happens to you as you're listening to this? And in the picture that you just saw, this is exactly what they were doing. They were climbing on British jeeps, taking out the Israeli flag as they heard that the vote went through. Dearest mother, dad, and Naomi, I walked in a semi-daze through the crowds of happy faces, through the deafening singing of David Melech Yisrael, Chai, Chai, V'Kayam, past the British tanks and jeeps piled high with pyramids of flag-waving, cheering children. I dodged motorcycles, wagons, cars, and trucks which were racing madly street, missing each other miraculously, their running boards and headlights overflowing with layer upon layer of elated, happy people. I pushed my way past the crying, kissing, tumultuous crowds and the exultant shouts of Mazal Tov and came back to the quiet of my room to try to share with you this never to be forgotten night. The light in my room was still on from last night. I had planned to go to sleep early since rumor had it that the voting at the UN on the partition plan would probably be postponed for another day. But at about 11 p.m., there was a knock on the door. We're getting through to America. Come on down. The voting's tonight. 10 pajama-clad bodies crowded into a room with space enough for 5 and sat tensely around the battered radio for what seemed like hours, while vain attempts were made to get clear reception. We got through just as the announcement of the majority vote was made, 33 in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. Ecstatic, we hugged and kissed each other frantically, then stood rigidly at attention and sang a Tikvah fervently. Out came bottles of wine, biscuits, and candy. We ate and drank and held a solemn little ceremony, then dashed to our rooms, hurriedly slipped on whatever clothing was on hand and banged on all the doors to wake up those who had slept through the good news. Arms linked, marching 6 abreast, singing all the way, the battalion of students advanced, shouting the news to neighbors who poked their sleepy heads out of windows and doors to see what the commotion was about. Straight to Amakasher, the bus terminal, confronting the watchmen with the news We demanded a bus to take us to town. He was so excited, he provided 3. In a mad scramble, we piled in, body on body. Down the road, we raced like a million hearts on fire, headed for the heart of Jerusalem. The streets in the city were beginning to fill as the news got around. People poured out of their homes in a continuous, ever-thickening stream. In the center of town, crowds of happy people, hugging each other, dancing horas and jigs, headed spontaneously as we were headed, drawn by some magnetic force, to the courtyard of the fortress, like Sochnut Jewish Agency building, which for years housed the hopes for a Jewish state in Palestine. Out came a flag, and onto the balcony came Golda Meyerson, mayor. There were no words to suit the moment. Choked with emotion, she managed to say Mazal Tov, and down came tears, oceans of unrestrained, happy tears. All night, streams of joyful crowds assembled in the courtyard, milling out to pay homage, to give vent to exultant feelings that welled up from deep inside. Rumor had it that Ben Gurion had just arrived from Tel Aviv and would make a personal appearance. Sure enough, there he was, standing on the balcony of the Sochnut building. He looked slowly and solemnly around him, to the rooftops crammed with people, to the throngs that stood solid in the courtyard below him. He raised his hand, and utter silence waited for his words. Ashreinu shezechinu layom hazeh. Blessed are we who have been privileged to witness this day. He concluded with Techi hamedina ha'ivrit. Long live the Jewish state. It doesn't have a name yet, and called for Tikvah. A solemn chant rose from all sides. The moment was too big for our feelings. There were few dry eyes and few steady voices. Ben Gurion tossed his head back proudly, tenderly touched the flag that hung from the railing, and charged the air with electricity when he shouted defiantly, "We are a free people." How I wish you could have heard the words and been here for this memorable night and never to be forgotten morning. Your loving daughter, Tzipi. Tzipora Porath, Letters from Jerusalem, 1947 to 1948. So, somebody want to share how you felt listening to that? I had to read it in its entirety, and I did actually leave out some parts. Anyone? It seems like so long ago to so many. It's an impossible situation, even for some Israelis who live here have to be reminded. Many don't, many it's in their neshama, but certainly those that are not here. We know when you go through an experience that's important to you, how important it is for others to be excited about it. Like I can, sometimes when I show something to younger students in junior high, and I'd have to think, well, are they really going to be as excited as I am about this text or this video? It's a very, very difficult, but there is a task ahead of us that's being suggested. And we began this discussion with when I read Danielle Hartman's of how we can find a path to be working on these challenges, but something as simple and pragmatic as a series. I don't know what you see here, but you can no doubt see that that's a picture of Ben Gurion. Children's books, Etz Bamidbar, a tree in the desert. And allow me to just share with this to you, because these are the words that have to be shared so that we see models of pioneers and not just high tech, but startup. Ben Gurion, was he not a startup? So I'll translate as I'm reading. One fall gray morning in the middle of the desert, a thorn bush wakes up and sees next to him a small stalk. "What are you doing here?" the thorn bush asked the seedling. "Hazaken sheli, my old man planted." "Who?" "That guy with the khaki kova temple and the white hair. Yes, they call him David Ben Gurion, and he came here from Tel Aviv." "Tel Aviv, but here there's no water, there's no shade, and very few people live here." "Well, the old man always dreamt about coming to the Negev," said the small seedling. "He says people here are good and that he's already done enough things in the city. And now he wants to live here with his whole being and with his hands. And he took me." You little thing, weak thing?" "Yes," the thornbush said. "You won't survive here." "Oh, yes, I will," the little seedling said. "I will grow and I will be a tall tree and I will have branches and flowers." "Who told you this?" "The old man." These are the kind of models that we have to make. I'm envious when I hear of young families going out in the middle of nowhere and having the opportunity to build. Anybody want to share anything? Stephen?
Well, all of us are equal as Jews. Some have different feelings. Nobody here goes back as far in history. Actually, being of the land almost 200 years as Esther Wesselman. In 1958, when I went to Israel at 16 years of age, I sat with Chaim Weizmann and 102 other students and 5 or 6 shlichim from New York and elsewhere. And we visited Ben Gurion at the Sedei Boker and the Eilat, and we went into Lebanon, and we did everything. It was the biggest trip ever to Israel at that in its early years. And so coming forward many years later, 60 years later or so, I come across, or 50 years later, my great-grandparents buried on Har HaZeitim. And I visited their grave with my wife 20 years ago. So all of us in varying degrees, and unfortunately, Elliot will agree with me, too many don't have that sense of connection with Israel. And if they don't, they should be aware that they really care, that their future generations won't be part of our people anymore. That's the danger, and that is what happens when you have too much freedoms and you don't recognize the responsibility and the obligations we have to our people to not break the chain of what is it, 200 generations, 150 anyway, that we inherit as individuals.
Thank you, Stephen. Anyone
Bracha.
else?
Yes, Bracha.
Dan?
I have a question. You read from a children's book, but is the curriculum that's offered in Israel to young children, do they go into the history of Israel and Ben Gurion, etc.? You being a teacher, maybe you could enlighten us about that.
I'm going to pull a fast one, and I'm going to ask a mother of 2 young women who are now out of the system. But if you could respond to that, Nahama?
They learn history. I'd really be curious to know if in the primary schools, if they would use a book like what Bracha just read from, because I was almost in tears from that story. But now I already forgot the question. I got so excited about the book, about
Do you remember
history and
your
about the
daughters?
models. Yeah, and
Sure.
about the models I don't believe that in the schools that my daughters studied in, and they're considered, at least one of them was in, they were both in very in a very good primary school that's well known, and for high school, one of them was in the Hartman High School, and the studies, I think, even there, were lacking in this area of modern Jewish history, and really in the heroes. And Bracha, you could write the curriculum for what could be taught if someone wanted to listen about the modern day heroes and who they should, the models that they should be. There are other big, great benefits of the school, and but not in this specific area, in answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, this is, rather than just focusing on the negative and the politics, this is what's being worked upon now. I think, yeah, it's
Bracha,
crucial.
I
Linda.
think that what you presented was so inspiring and moving. If I had to choose one time and place to be in history, it would have been at the building of the state, but never mind that. But today,
It's still being built, by the way.
yeah,
One of my favorite sentences from Sunday evening was Yaakov Katz saying, Israel is a work in progress.
right. But one thing, I don't mean to put a downer on this, but one thing is that I don't think that children in today's society are reading the way our children or the way we read. And Ezra Klein did a podcast about reading and how we're not able to focus because of the media. And schools cannot present these kids with books anymore. They have to be presented with videos. I mean, it's a real problem to convey what we want to convey.
No, absolutely. But just because that's the way it is doesn't mean we don't have to make an effort to get them. But you're right. You have to be so creative. Now, this book, if you look at it, it's nice to look at in the pictures and the way it's, and it wouldn't be just that you give it to the kids to read, but you have to get somebody to read it to them with that. And you get that sense, depending on how the person's reading it. Is this important to you? You know that line in the Haggadah, since Pesach is coming sooner than later, right? We still haven't had Hanukkah, which I'll get. Remind me, I have to say something about Hanukkah. Where it says, and you teach as if you went out, tell your children as if you went out of Egypt. The significance of that is that they're not going to pay attention to you if they have a sense that it's not important to you. Right. But I
Bracha, your
think stories
passion.
are an incredible way that you connect with. But you're right, you have to be creative. They're not going to just sit. And that's a real problem for many reasons.
Bracha,
Yeah.
your passion is admirable. There's something, I'm into technology and so forth, but there's something so very special about holding a book, especially if the book has content that is emotionally energizing, and your passion is absolutely beautiful. And as I say this, I can have visions of you reading this story to young children who would be captivated by it. And not everybody has the ability to read or to be oral interpretation of literature and to read it with a sense of intonation and flow and pause patterns that really captivate the
going.
listener. So keep it up for many years.
We each do our own thing. Absolutely. Thank you, Elliot. Okay, so you might have seen already the flyer for the next series toward Hanukkah. I'm trying to figure out a way that I can share with you some of the Levivot that are already on the streets here, some delicious ones from Roladine and Kadosh. Anyway,
Ganiyot you mean, Bracha, not Levivot.
what did I say? Yes, thank you. Sufganiyot, the donuts. Yes. And so the next 4 weeks will be dedicated to Hanukkah. So I look forward to that and ideas, some of which have been touched upon before, but concepts that follow up on what we're talking about today. Keeping our people alive. And it's a challenge. We all know that. And our first session will have to do with the dialectic between believing in the miracle and human initiative, our Maccabees and our soldiers today, whether they're in the army here or you guys trying to do what you can to pass on this narrative. Anyway, okay. So stay warm and Gail, keep up your record of not having COVID. Anybody else there who said they haven't had it yet? Okay.
Me,
You didn't have it, Marlene?
nope. Everybody in my
Oh.
family but me.
Yeah. All right, so there are a few of you. Gail,
Yes.
Marlene, Bev, that you haven't had it. So you've got something in common. Good. Okay.
Yes,
Stay well. Okay.
Stay
Hi,
healthy.
everyone.
Yasher Koach.
Thanks.
Thank you.